Welcome to the Back Up and Thriving Accessible Travel Podcast. My name is Sophie Elwes, and I'm the host for this series. I sustained a spinal cord injury myself back in 2011 and have a T4 complete injury, and I work as Head of Services at Backup. Over this series, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who all are affected by spinal cord injury, and each episode will look at a different mode of transport. Guests will be sharing their stories, their travel experiences, as well as some fabulous advice. Our hope is that listeners will realise that travelling after spinal cord injury is not only possible, but that it can be life-changing too. Pete, welcome to the Backup Podcast. Lovely to see you.
Hey Sophie, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. So let's dive right in. First of all, would you introduce yourself and tell me a bit about your journey to Backup and how you got here?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Pete. I am T6 injury. I've been injured for 18 years now. I got involved with Backup less than a year post-injury. Now, when I was doing rehab, I didn't get a chance to do the skill session in the unit. And it was only when I went back in for an outpatient appointment that I happened to pick up a magazine and there's a story about Backup in there. And I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. So I picked up the phone, gave them a call, and I think that they had a gap on a multi-activity course. It's like, do you want to do it? I was like, oh, yeah. It sounds interesting. So I think maybe a couple of weeks later I was down in Exmoor and taking part in the multi-activity course. And that was the start of everything. And then from there, it was doing that, learning wheelchair skills, having that great time when you start challenging the ideas of what you think you can do with things like abseiling, even hand biking. That was something new. Kayaking, and we did horse riding on that multi-activity. Yeah, camping as well. And it'd only been less than a year, so it was still relatively early on. Yeah. And then from there, it was water skiing course that I used to do back in the day. I then did drama course, which is that was an amazing course. That was my favourite course.
Really?
Yeah, that was the biggest step out of my comfort zone. At the time, 100% it was. I found, as good as it was going kayaking and abseiling, that was very easy for me. Those risky activities, I think that's part of my personality, so that was really easy. But at the time, going on a drama course, it was done with Taking Flight Theatre down in Pembrokeshire, so stunning area of Wales as well. But having that opportunity to really push myself, be speaking in front of people, do things that I've never done before, in the sense of acting, just really fun, and really enjoyed that course.
Wow.
And that gave me the biggest boost in confidence. And then it was deciding to become a wheelchair skills trainer. That was 17 years ago now, so I've been wheelchair skills trainer for quite a while.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So 18 years ago you had your injury, right? Uh-huh. Do you mind? I think listeners would be keen to hear a little bit about that. Are you happy to share a bit about that story?
Yeah, of course. I can tell you as much as I remember, which isn't much. So I was living up in Ambleside at the time, working in a bar up there. An absolutely stunning location overlooking Lake Windermere. And if anyone's been up to the Lake District before, they'll know that public transport isn't great. So I had a motorbike to get around, and I don't remember the accident itself, but I've been told that it was bad weather one day, and going around the country roads up there, I lost control going around a corner and ended up on the wrong side of the road and in the path of an Arctic lorry. So that going in the opposite direction, it can be a bit of a cliche, but it's a lucky to be alive situation. The main damage was T6, so middle of my chest, and that's the injury that did the most damage. And then there was a few other injuries like nerve damage to one arm, kind of muscle damage to one arm as well. So there's a lot of like secondary injuries as well. And I mean, perhaps the most worrying one was a C2 injury that was spinal bruising, so swelling. God. When I first got injured. So that was for the first like 6 weeks or so. I couldn't move my arms either.
Gosh. So were you in ICU initially?
No, that's a bit I don't remember, because I don't remember the accident itself. I remember coming to when I was in Preston Hospital before I got transferred to the spinal unit in Southport. I think it was 6 days post-injury maybe. I was in the spinal unit. Quick. So it was quite rapid. Yeah.
And I mean, the theme of this conversation is all about using a wheelchair. Do you remember the first time, I mean, I'm sure you do, you maybe saw a wheelchair in the spinal unit and got into one? And would you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah. So I think, well, the bit before getting in a wheelchair is about dealing with the perception of using a wheelchair as well. And I remember I was on bed rest for 14 weeks. So while my back healed conservatively, rather than getting it operated on, I was lying in bed for a long time. I had plenty of time to think about it. And pre-injury, I had no experience of disability, no experience of using a wheelchair. Didn't really know anyone who did it. So I had this idea, genuinely, it's a ridiculous idea, but I had this idea that wheelchair users were just going to be sat in front of the telly, and that's what life was going to be like. It's like, what else do wheelchairs do? Which is obviously nearly 20 years later, looking back at what I've done, what we've seen other people do. It's a stupid idea, but I guess it's something that a lot of people deal with on some level, and it's that internalized ableism. It's about these negative perceptions of disability that we deal with.
I think, internalized ableism is such an important thing, and it's only something for me, probably 5 years ago, I came across that term and started learning actually what it meant and understanding my perception and where my thinking around that. And I think it's really powerful to be having those sorts of conversations, and I hope that people listening will recognise that if there is some of that in themselves, that it's quite normal, but it's good to be aware, isn't it?
It definitely is, and I think it's important to recognise that what we're dealing with, disability, is a social structure. It's the barriers that we face every day that stop us from doing things. Our impairments, our injuries. Yes, they need certain concessions, we need equipment to do things, but it's those social barriers that really stop us. And it's why, over the years, the way I've talked about disability has changed. I now talk about it in terms of that social construct, because I think it's really important to recognise what stops people from achieving things. I think that in some ways it's unfortunate that we start our journey in a rehabilitation setting, because as much as we need to learn the skills to go on to live this new life, it's very much embedded within that setting that, we're going to fix you, or we're going to try and fix you. I came across an expression recently, habilitation, when I was away travelling, and it's not about going back and figuring out how you're going to rehabilitate someone to go back to live this life. It's about habilitation. So looking forward to this new life. And it's just, there's so many things where it's just that slight change of language, this slight shift in ideology, and all of a sudden you're looking at things very differently. And in a much more positive way as well, because you're not broken. I mean, it's about the diversity of the human condition, isn't it? Everyone's different, and that's okay.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is time is a great healer, and I don't mean that in the kind of physical sense. It's, in terms of accepting and reconciling and all of that sort of stuff. But I think one would imagine that, Pete, looking at rehab and what's to come at that stage, that's probably not where you were at. Would you tell me a bit about that stage and the first time you got in a wheelchair?
Yeah, so first time using a wheelchair. So I'm getting off this massive stint in bed rest. I was incredibly grateful just to be out of bed at that point. And the first wheelchair that you get in is this massive thing that's got such a high backrest. I think it might have even had head support on. It wasn't even a vertical backrest. It was at an angle, because I've been in bed for 14 weeks. So if you get up too soon into a fully seated position, then your body's just not going to be used to it. So I remember getting in this thing that I don't even think I could push myself around at that point. But yeah, it was just so grateful to be out of bed and just getting pushed around the ward, just having a look at something other than the four walls that I've become used to. And then I think quickly you extend the amount of time you spend in the chair. Starting off at an hour for a day, and then I felt okay with that, so then it goes up and up, and then quite quickly as well became good and well enough to use a smaller wheelchair. Nothing lightweight, but felt pretty great to be in something a bit smaller that was able to move around the unit by myself as well. And then, yeah, it was just so good to be out of bed. I can't tell you what a long time, and I'm probably forgetting just what it felt like now, but 14 weeks was just such a long time to be lying on my back for. So just really happy to get out. And then moving around the unit at first, and then exploring the wider hospital, and then going outside of the hospital as well. And then, yeah, just being able to get out into having some fresh air again. And then just desperately trying to grab some sense of normality. So I was injured just before I was 20, so getting out of bed as a 20-year-old, I'm like, okay, what do we want to do? And so quite quickly discovered there was a pub within pushing distance. So that was one of the motivations early on, to be able to get out to that area. And I think that was a big part of rehab as well. About that shift in mindset, and it's, wait a minute, this is something that feels quite normal. And not, and going down there with some of the other lads who are on the unit as well, you obviously form quite a tight friendship circle with when you all going through that at the same time. That element of peer support that's so important, isn't it?
100%. Powerful in the unit, isn't it? Supporting each other. I've never known anything like it. That support that you all give each other, and celebrating successes. Particularly, to my mind, it's in the rehab process, and once you've achieved the transfer that you're trying to work on or whatever. I remember trying to do a 180 transfer. I wanted to go somewhere, so I wanted to learn how to do that so that I could use the loo in this house. And it's such an achievement, but it was so much. It's so great to have that support of people around you who just got it, wasn't it?
Or even if people don't know as well, because you're going through it at the same time, it's just that element of not knowing together.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest thing is you're not alone. And it's, yeah, everyone's got their personal journey through this, and our experience is very different in that sense. But also, we've all been through very similar things. And that's the great thing about it. If you want to know something, then there's a good chance someone's done it before. So you can reach out to this massive community and you can find the answers that you need.
I mean, speaking of that, for someone listening who perhaps might be in an early stage and is looking for that kind of community, where would you find that, do you think?
I think there's so many places you can look for it. I think over the years, I found mine through backup courses, wheelchair skills. That was a big part for me, particularly with wheelchair skills training. I think you've got that peer element that comes through either the courses, people trying through new things, which in my mind is an expansion of that, what you get in the spinal units. So you're going into these environments and you try out all these new things together, and it's very much a strong sense of camaraderie on the courses. I mean, you've got other things that can be a bit more one-on-one out of the backup offer, whether that's kind of telephone support when you're still in the unit, just leaving the unit, or the mentoring support as well. I think there's loads of really good local support on offer as well. You've got sports, which I've always taken up in the recreational sense. I think there's lots of local disabled organisations that offer some really good support as well. So there's so many opportunities to link in across so many different areas depending on what you're looking for.
So yeah, you were talking about heading out to the pub, those early stages. When did you first start to learn some skills? And tell me a bit about that. When did you first learn how to do backwheel balance? Pop a wheelie, as some would say.
I was very first in the unit. I think I might have started trying to do it then, but I remember it being so difficult with the chair I was using at the time. I couldn't just go straight into backwheel balance. I'd have to like reverse into it just to get the speed and then a flick up into backwheel balance. And I guess I'm thinking about it, and I must have been learning wheelchair skills as I was starting going out. So whether it was the first trip to the pub or when I got out, it wasn't a kind of a smooth exit from the spinal unit for me. So I ended up going into a nursing home when I got discharged. So I had started learning to drive when I was still in that nursing home. It was called the Young Disabled Unit, but I was the youngest person in there by about 20 years. So it wasn't such a young environment. Yeah, so I guess it was bit by bit, I was just starting to learn things. And I was happy to try out new things, but I also didn't understand the technical elements of what I was doing maybe. So I remember trying to go across a pelican crossing one time and going over some little bumps. I tried flicking my wheels over, completely missed it. Casters got jammed on the floor and I came sliding out the front of the wheelchair, ended up in a pile on the road. So I was always willing to try stuff, but it was never, the wheelchair skills were never that tight. And then it was when I went on the multi-activity course, and you learn the skills, but it's when you start practicing them regularly, that's when you really get much better at them. So if you're practicing them going out every day and just as you're going wherever you are, you're doing curbs and you're doing maybe ramps or slopes, hills, whatever's in your way, you're just going to tighten up those skills more and more. And it's so important to make sure that you keep doing that. If you don't regularly practice, then you lose the skills. I mean, my skills have never been as good as when I moved to London and I didn't see the point of having a car. I didn't need a car when I moved to London because they've got a good public transport system here. So I was using wheelchair skills every day. And it was just little things like going up and down curbs when I was working in East London, going down steps, using escalators on a regular basis. I do stuff now, it's just muscle memory. I don't even think about it. I mean, public react to it like it's the most shocking thing they've ever seen. It's just me going down some steps. And it's a skill. It's a skill that's got so valuable to learn, and it's fundamental for wheelchair users to have that confidence to get around using their wheelchair.
Couldn't agree with you more about keeping it up. Like I learned how to do a backwheel balance in the unit, and then fast forward 6 months or so, and I hadn't been doing curbs and that sort of thing because I just lost a lot of confidence. And then I went on a course and I, upped those skills and stuff. But you do have to keep them going. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to just live your life and set it up in such a way that you don't do that. But it makes life so much harder if you can't do those things, use those skills to get around and live life.
Definitely. And I think I've had that experience when I got a car and maybe using wheelchair skills less then. And more recently, when I got a tri-ride, it's such an amazing bit of kit. But I also realised I was using it too much. It's so easy to get around with. And I wasn't using wheelchair skills as much as I maybe should be. So it's, not quite as tight as it should be. So I'm a lot more intentional around using my tri-ride now.
Good on you.
And I think that's both for exercise, but also wheelchair skills as well.
Yeah. I would love for you to share, before you were working across London and you had quite an extraordinary journey to take every day. Would you take us through that journey and how you used your wheelchair skills to get across London in routes that shouldn't be accessible, but you managed to totally defy that?
Sure. So I was working for a couple of years at a disabled persons organisation over in Tower Hamlets called Real. And, I mean, for anyone who's used London public transport before, you'll know that it's very few stations on the whole that are fully accessible. So, out of kind of 290 stations, I think around 30% of them have some form of accessibility, and even then it's not great across all of those. I think when you're looking at fully accessible stations, the numbers don't get published for this. They like to tell you it's a third of stations, but I think it's close to 20% of stations that are fully accessible, which is quite shocking in 2024. I recently did the maths on it actually, and if we wait for London to be fully accessible at the rate of progression they're going through now, it's going to be, would you like to guess what year it's going to be fully accessible?
2050. Later than that.
Yeah.
2070.
Later than that.
Oh, God, it's so depressing.
It is. So, 2096. Yeah. So there's
So how do we get around that? What did he do?
Get around it? Yeah,
what did he do to defy TfL and the infrastructure of this very old city in which we live?
Rather than looking for an accessible route, I took the route that was going to get me there fastest. So it was taking steps at one of the stations to get onto the underground.
So what, going down the steps?
Yeah, going down steps.
How do you do that?
So there's two ways to go down steps. You can go down forwards, but whenever there's the option to go down backwards, that's safer. So holding onto the handrail and then reversing down the steps. Yeah, that's something that I'm just doing on pretty much an everyday basis. Again, getting a lot of looks as I'm doing it from other commuters, but it's just something that you've got to do. Using escalators is another one. So very similar to going downstairs. Actually less risky, although people think it's more risky. So positioning yourself on the escalator, you're facing backwards, going down, and then holding onto the handrails as you're going down as well. But obviously you're just on that one step through the whole journey down the escalator. So yeah, much safer than going down steps actually. Mm. Yeah, and then once I made it to East London, things are a lot more accessible over there. East London, since the Paralympics, has got a lot more accessibility on the Jubilee line where I was using over that side, and also on the DLR as well. So getting off there, it was a short push over across the Thames to get to the office I was working in. And then on the way back, I took the overground. Well, that's an interesting one as well, actually, because the train pass that we get in London only allows you to use trains after 9:30 in the morning, which is like saying, oh yeah, wheelchair users, they obviously don't need to be out before that time in the morning. No, of course we don't need to get to work early. So I planned a route, trying to save money, going on the underground to get there, but the overground to get back. Actually, the other reason I didn't take the train on the way there as well is because the local train station hasn't got a lift. So I don't want to be lifting myself upstairs to get onto the train.
Oh my gosh, yeah. As in like stairs going... Because that is possible, isn't it? To go up like a flight of stairs. I mean, yeah. Yeah,
if it was an emergency, I'd lift myself onto the steps, pull myself up and then drag my chair with me. But it's not what you want to do. Can you imagine if it's bad weather, people walking past you and on a wet floor as well?
No way.
I don't want to be doing that.
No way. You need some serious strength for that as well, I think.
Yeah, and just that additional time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my daily commute for 2 years. And it just is something that just so normalised for me. Just don't even think about it anymore. And that's what I was saying about just practicing these skills all the time, just making sure they become muscle memory.
We should probably say something about, get trained in these skills, ideally, and do them in a way that's safe. I mean, I've never... know a lot of people with a spinal cord injury, but you're an absolute master at wheelchair skills. And yeah, I think I can imagine that you are extremely safe doing it. You really know what you're doing. You're totally in control.
It's all about practice. it's about really refining those skills. But it was all new at one point, wasn't it?
100%. So we've been talking kind of about London and getting around in the UK. I know that you've been all over the world and you've had some pretty kind of wild adventures in places that are not necessarily what we would deem accessible. Tell me about using a wheelchair in foreign countries and some of your experiences and, yeah, what that's been like, if you would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first trip away from home was probably the backup course that I went on. And then it was another one, and we were staying at Heron Lake when it was water skiing, then a different trip, and maybe I was driving by that point, so I drove myself to the one in Wales, and then about a year after that, I decided to go and work in the States for the first time, post-injury. And it's a country that is fairly accessible, no language barriers, low cultural barriers, so I felt safer doing that. And then you start going to the less accessible locations, and I think it was maybe 2 years after that I was in Bangladesh for 3 months. That was with a group, and then off the back of that, I decided that I was confident enough to go back on my own. I look back at that now, and that was quite an extreme trip, going to Bangladesh to volunteer on a one-way ticket with a fractured wrist, which was... and then deciding to travel home overland from there.
Tell us about that. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, so I'd been volunteering in Bangladesh for 3 months, and before I left, we had a few days in the capital, Dhaka, and we were just doing a few things there, and I'd found out about a spinal rehab centre there. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm really keen to go and explore what this is like. And I was so impressed with what I saw, like this in a country where there's so much poverty and so there's so much of a gap with access to some basic provisions. Then what I saw over there were people getting such great level of care, and in some ways actually more support than what we get over here, which was just really impressed with. So I remember being in the spinal unit, and before leaving, it was all going through the forms around what benefits you're entitled to. Over in Bangladesh, they don't have the same social care system, so what they get is vocational training. So how to open up their own shop, maybe some training around growing their own food, and that blew my mind. So I was like, I want to go back there and volunteer. So I went back there to volunteer, doing some kind of peer support role. A bit of wheelchair skills, and then while I was over there, I decided to do a fundraiser for them. So I decided to travel back to the UK overland. So it was going to be buses and trains and boats. And I'd already done a bit of travel in Bangladesh by that point, so I knew that I could get onto inaccessible buses by lifting myself up the steps and then onto a seat. And I think I'd done a bit of train travel as well, again, lifting myself onto the carriage and then onto the seat. So I was like, how many chances do you get to do stuff like that? So with this kind of little idea, I just set off on my way, and then the route changed. So a little route that was going to take me through China and then through Russia and back to the UK actually took me via Japan in the end. So a hell of a route across some quite inaccessible countries. But again, all of these skills I'd learned already just being transferred to different settings. And it was the ultimate test of wheelchair skills.
Yeah, I bet it was.
It was the ultimate test of wheelchair skills, and going across kind of journeys like on a boat that was a 2-day journey, I think, was the longest boat ride I did. The longest train journey I did was 71 hours on an accessible train. That was a long journey. Yeah, that was from Almaty to Aktau in Kazakhstan. That was quite a fun journey as well, because I set off from Almaty and I didn't have anything planned when I got to Actow. I was like, I'm just going to wing it. And then I got chatting to this guy on the train. He didn't speak much English. So it's quite funny because obviously I don't speak Kazakh. So he was doing a little game Pictionary to communicate from pictures. And so he was a cardiology student, and he got off the train quite early on, maybe a day into the journey. But when we were talking, he found out that his brother lives in Actow, and he's like, oh yeah, my brother's going to meet you and help you out when you get there. But I thought it was just drawing pictures here. It was like, I completely forgot about it. But then when I arrived at Actow, got off the train, and there's a guy stood on the platform, and he waves at me, and he comes over, and again, broken English, but it's this guy's brother. And he ends up driving me around a few hotels when we check accessibility. And yeah, I think that's the other thing about traveling as well. Kind of, it always restores my faith in human nature. Some really great people that you meet. And yeah, it's that wheelchair skills, the confidence to do it, and just having some faith in humanity as well.
I love that so much. I find that really moving, to be honest. But it makes sense, doesn't it? It's restoring faith in humanity. That's amazing. So I would love to delve so much deeper than this. But we have 3 questions that I'd like to ask you to round things off a little bit. You've spoken about a few different kind of memories in terms of travel. What would you say is your top travel memory that you'd like to share with us?
Let's go for the most recent one. So I was over in Australia and New Zealand at the start of this year. I was over there on a fellowship, so I spent kind of 7 weeks going around doing research and then a 2-week holiday at the end. And I'm very much about kind of a thrill seeker, adrenaline junkie. So the 2-week holiday that I had was going to be around the adventure activities on the South Island, New Zealand. So I rented a camper van. Now, I did all this online in advance and rocked up at the rental place, paid for it, everything was good. They gave me the keys, and then I got outside. What I didn't appreciate was just how high this van was going to be. So I opened this door, and I see the size of this seat, and it's probably above my head. I'm like, oh man, I have no idea what I'm going to do here. And I think this is what we're faced with every day, isn't it? It's like problem solving.
Totally.
And like, how do we get past this? So it felt like I was there for about half an hour, putting my hands in different places, like, how do I do this transfer? So there's not enough space for me to sit in front of the seat to get split off the transfer a bit more. It's like, I don't know where to put my hands. I have no idea. I was so close to going back in there and being like, it's too tall for me, I might need another one. But in the end, I figured it out, and it was basically just, trying to hook myself in, holding onto the steering wheel and onto the seat as well. And I had this thing for 2 weeks as well. So it got better over 2 weeks. I got a bit more of a structure to the transfer, and then started breaking it down a bit more, which made it a lot easier. I mean, lesson learned for next time over there, definitely get a smaller van. I didn't need one that was big.
Don't be so stubborn.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask if you need it. Ask for help, right? Okay, a couple more questions. First one, can you give us, for perhaps people with spinal cord injury, can you give us your top tip about living well with a spinal cord injury? It doesn't have to be linked to travel, but just more broadly.
That's a really good question. So when I was on my fellowship, I interviewed a professor from Sydney University, and he'd done a piece of research around post-trauma growth. And this piece of research was actually around people with spinal cord injury. And it is around, I mean, having a spinal cord injury isn't the end. There's so many opportunities out there, and you can grow and develop post-injury, as we both know, as we've both done. And it's important to find, as part of that, finding your purpose and what's important to you. And in this research, he identified situational purpose and global purpose as well. And it's really important to figure out what your purpose is on an individual level, what matters to you, and then how you then connect it to that global purpose, that bigger community. And it's not necessarily going to be identical, but yeah, there is that big crossover. And for me, I set up a social enterprise, which is what I do now, teaching wheelchair skills. And so that's my situational purpose. That's what drives me on the individual level. But the idea of giving people wheelchair skills, empowering disabled people, is part of a much bigger picture as well. So it's like how you connect the two. And I mean, I've done something that made a big difference to me in that purpose. But I mean, purpose is so individual as well. And it might be something to do with disability, but it might not be as well.
Totally. I love so much how a lot of the time it's not specific to spinal cord injury. If there's something, some advice or tips or something, we're all more similar than we realise. We're all humans, and a lot of things that we face are just the same as the next person who perhaps isn't using a wheelchair, perhaps. Amazing. So final question. What's your top kind of travel tip? Doesn't have to be just about using a wheelchair. It can be just about travelling generally.
Oh, wow. So top travel tip. The best thing I did on my last trip was to take a second axle for my wheelchair, which I've never done before, but I have quite a lot of camber on my wheelchair. I've got 6 degrees of camber. And that stops me from going through doorways quite a lot when I'm away. And over here, not such a big deal. I find a lot of doorways are wide enough for me to get through. And when I've been away previously, it's meant that I've got to get on the floor, take a wheel off, lift my chair through and get back in my chair. But there's so many times that I went away this time when I had 0 camber rather than 6 degrees camber on. I was just able to get through a door. And that just made life so much easier. But think about how you can make it easier for yourself, I guess, is my top tip. And that might be with the equipment that you take in. That could be with how you research what you need going away as well. Could be asking for advice from people who've done it before. But yeah, make life easier for yourself, I guess, is the tip.
Love that. Great advice. Thank you so much, Pete. This has been an amazing conversation and one that I think will inspire many people out there. So yeah, thank you so much for this.
That's all. Thanks for inviting me along. It was really fun to chat.
You've been listening to the Back Up and Thriving Accessible Travel podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do give us a rating, review, and subscribe or follow on Spotify, because this helps us reach more people that might enjoy or even benefit from listening. See you next time.